Welcome in, everyone, to your weekly Fantasy Pros Championship live draft coverage. FFPC brings it to you every Tuesday night. I'm your host, Aiden LaCoy. Joining me, as he usually does, Dave Tripoli, and a special guest today. We're very excited to have him on. FTN's high-stakes lead analyst, 2016 main event champion, Nelson Sousa. Nelson, thank you so much for hopping on the show. We're excited to hear all the great information you're going to be bringing today.
Yeah, this should be fun tonight. Thanks for having me on, guys.
For anyone who's tuning in for the first time, I mean, these drafts are always exciting. I think we repeat it at the start of pretty much every show, but specifically these kind of late night Fantasy Pros Championship drafts, absolutely crazy.
You usually get pretty crazy.
ADP is just ignored at times, so it always makes it fun. Nelson, I'm going to ask you a quick question to start, just kind of maybe one that I don't know if you can answer yet. I know you're just kind of getting into kind of your drafting season. Past years, I feel as though people will say, "Oh, I really like drafting early." I know last year, in particular, 2023, a lot of people were saying that they hated the ends of the first round. They hated getting picks 10, 11, 12. Early on, as you're starting kind of drafts this year, is there any specific range in terms of draft picks that you're getting that you prefer to others? Or is this year, which I have heard personally, that people are saying it's, wherever I fall in that kind of in the draft, I'm fine with. I'm comfortable at the top. I'm comfortable kind of at the 10, 11, 12. Are you finding that any range is better than another one this year?
So far, I think it's similar to last year. I was comfortable drafting anywhere in the draft. It really didn't matter to me if I was, first overall or pick 12 or in the middle. I think you can draft from anywhere. I think the player pool also, if you noticed it last year, that the ADP wasn't really sticky as previous years. And like the first round was usually vanilla, and it was just kind of like, all right, these are the top 5 guys off the board every year. And that wasn't the case last year. It was just kind of guys were all over the place. And once main event season hit, players moved up, players moved down. So I think it's similar to this year. I think that's what's going to happen.
First round is done. We went kind of pretty chalky. I mean, Terp, for you and me, comparatively, it's the past couple of Fantasy Pro streams we've done where we had an Amon Ra first overall. We had guys whose ADPs in like the late second were going at times kind of late first, mid first, but a pretty by the books first round. Terp, I'm going to ask you this. Jonathan Taylor here goes at the 111. We've talked a lot, you and me, about Anthony Richardson this year, and we kind of our belief in the Colts, but we haven't talked a lot about Jonathan Taylor. Where is your kind of comfort level drafting Jonathan Taylor? Obviously, had kind of a weird year last year in terms of, started off, he was banged up, he was on the IR, had a good year when he played, and he really came on kind of down the stretch, and then he got banged up again. But I mean, where are you making Jonathan Taylor now, a year removed from just kind of a rough offseason that he had? Goes at the 111 today.
I'll be underweight compared to most of the field. I mean, I like guys better at where, the position where he's going, especially guys like Zamir Gibbs, Puka, definitely A.J. Brown. And then with the FFPC, you have all these tight ends that you could build double tight end. You can go, Gibbs Laporta, Gibbs Kelsey, Gibbs London, Gibbs Harrison. I like that just a little bit more than Taylor. I love Anthony Richardson this year, so it's hard to love both. Is there a possibility that both get there? There is, but I just don't think it's as likely as some people put it out to be where Jonathan Taylor's getting drafted. He does have some positives, obviously. There's nobody behind him. I mean, there's Trey Sermon, there's Evan Hall, there's a bunch of other guys who are, very average football players. But with him, I mean, the opportunity is going to be there. And from a fantasy football owner, you love that, but I just feel like Anthony Richardson, if he's healthy, is going to take away a lot of them goal line touches from Richardson. And really, his value is a little too high for me right now.
Nelson, I got our chat is popping off, and an interesting comment. Bill Hollywood says he's out on A.J. Brown. Terp, I know you disagree with that. Nelson, what are your kind of thoughts on A.J. Brown this year? He goes at the 109, one of the elite receivers in the game, but Bill Hollywood there in the chat saying that he has some reservations about drafting. Do you at all agree with that, or are you completely on the A.J. Brown bandwagon?
I got A.J. Brown ranked pretty high in my rankings, so I'm very much in on him this year. And I'm not sure what the argument would be for fading him. I think he's got an upgrade now in offensive play caller. It was an offense last year that he showed you that he was basically rattling off like wide receiver one weeks for like 4 weeks in a row, maybe something like that.
Monster weeks.
Yeah, he was just putting up monster weeks, and then the defenses caught up to it, and they never adjusted, and they got rid of the coordinator, and in comes Kellen Moore. I expect more pre-snap motion with the receivers this year, and lining up AJ Brown all over the formation. So I don't see any negatives for AJ Brown.
I agree. I see no downside whatsoever in the player. I mean, he was the best receiver in fantasy football for that stretch last year, and then the team just fell off the face of the earth because they just were terrible. I mean, I don't even want to talk about it again because I am an Eagles fan. But with Brown, with Smith, I mean, Kellen Moore, thank God they have a new, fresh offensive coordinator in there. Always been a big fan of him when he was in Dallas. The Chargers was, a little bit of a mixed bag, but you could say that was injuries. Herbert got hurt. Mike Williams, obviously gets hurt again. But with him, he's going to bring something that's, hasn't been seen with A.J. Brown in a little bit in Philadelphia, and that's motion. He's going to get moved around. He's going to get put in the slot. He's going to put on the outside. I mean, there's a world where you could put A.J. Brown as the wide receiver one this year. I definitely think it's in the range of possibilities. The defense is going to be a little bit better, but we're still going to have a lot of young players out there, so they're going to be in more high-scoring games. The division got better. Jaden Daniels with the Commanders. Dak Prescott's still going to chuck the ball around the field all the time. So they're going to be in a little bit more of a up-tempo type of, games, with Kellen Moore. So A.J. Brown, I see no downside here. I mean, I don't – he's going in a fair spot. I think he should be going a little bit higher over certain players, but, I have no downside whatsoever in A.J. Brown. I don't understand how anybody can completely fade him. There's just no – you can say you don't like him as much as Jefferson or Chase or Hill or St. Brown. Maybe that's fair. But to say you're going to fade him and you don't like him, like, who are you putting over him?
All right, guys. Kyron Williams goes at the 302. We had a big kind of right before the show kicked off conversation about him. He normally goes around the 212, slight fall, but goes at the 302. His range has kind of fluctuated in from this kind of mid-second at some points to even mid-third we've seen. Turb, I'm going to let you ask the question because you had a good one. Nelson, you have a world-famous fade list. That is, I mean, if you're playing high stakes, you've probably heard about Nelson's fade list. It is gospel for some people. And basically this list is you have, and if you'd like to, how about before we even get into the Kyron Williams, just if you could give us a kind of quick rationale about maybe how your fade list came to be for people who don't know, and then some of kind of your rationale that goes into it.
Yeah. So like the short version of it is, back in the day, there was a running back named Zach Stacy, and he had a really good run for the Rams, and he won people a lot of leagues that year. The following year, he got pushed way up in drafts, and it really, to me, when I looked at it, like I ended up drafting him, and he hurt a lot of my teams. I had a really bad year. And I started thinking more about it on creating like a fade list and kind of going through notes and finding players that really either not going at a good price or just based on their profile, shouldn't be going as high as they are. Some players due to injury. So I kind of created a set of rules for my fade list. And ever since then, I've had that, and I've done well with it by fading a lot of the guys. It's not your typical fade list in terms of it's pretty aggressive. It's not like I have players like after round 10. I don't care about that. Like players after round 10 are not going to hurt you on your fantasy team. You cut them, you move on, pick up a guy off the waiver wire. But it's really avoiding the landmines in the early rounds that can really ruin your season. So I concentrate more on, and that's the thing that becomes kind of unpopular for some people is, there's players that you really like and really talented and whether they had a good year last year or you're projecting a good year this year, they go in the early rounds. So it's kind of an unpopular fade list in terms of that, because people are kind of like, what the heck? Like, why are you fading, so-and-so player? So with that said, for running backs, one of my biggest things is looking at like the Zach Stacy profile, Mike Davis back in the day, and then like Damian Williams would be like another example. Those players were guys that either you picked up off the waiver wire the year prior, or you drafted them really late. And essentially, they were not on anybody's radar. No one really valued them. And now this year, they're going in the top 4 rounds. That's kind of a rule that I created, that in the top 4 rounds, if any of those players fit that profile, I'm just fading them. And because over the years, it's worked out for me ever since Zach Stacy happened. So this year, Kyron Williams is one of those guys that fits that profile. I like Kyron Williams. I had him on a lot of my teams last year. But this year, when you really look at it, he's a 200-pound running back, about 5'8", 5th-round pick of the Rams. Last year, he was a late-round pick, undrafted in some leagues. So he was just an afterthought. And now, all of a sudden, we're going to go draft him in the 2nd round, early 3rd round. That's, to me, like that's a perfect example of I'm just going to let him beat me, and there's already warning signs of why you should be hesitant on drafting Kyron with the Rams drafting Quorum. And there was already some type of foot injury for Kyron during OTAs. So that's, sorry, I was going to try to keep it short, but that's kind of like the long-winded.
Great knowledge. Say as long as you want.
Terp, you asked kind of thing, and I'm stealing your question though. But so Terp asked kind of earlier, and I think you did give a good answer. If you're drafting, when would you take Kyron Williams? In what world is there a fall that constitutes you taking him to try and what's worth it there?
So Terp asked me, where would I draft him? Like, give me a number, give me a round. And I said to him, 5th round. And he said, okay, so basically you're not drafting him. And that's because he's never going to make it there unless we hear some like real negative news about him as we get to the preseason. So that's probably where I would think like, oh, okay, this is a fair price for him. I think in the 3rd round, there's too many players that I like over him that I'm just never going to take him. So someone's always going to draft him higher than I'm ever willing to take him. So he essentially becomes a fade.
Gotta talk, because the chat is kind of
asking a million questions.
Yeah. I wanted, though, this mid-3rd round, Devonte Adams, the latest he's gone over the last week in this format is the 212. So not only is this the latest he's ever been drafted in this format over the last week, it's the latest by a mile. He falls to the 307 today. I mean, obviously quarterback concerns there. He's getting up, he's getting older. But again, another consistent year last year. It wasn't, we're not getting prime Devonte Adams anymore, but still turning a very solid year. For the most part, has still been going as a 2nd round pick in FFPC redraft formats. So really surprising to see him in the mid-3rd, although I'm sure there are people out there who would argue that this is where he should have been going all along. Terp, I'll start with you, Nelson, then I'll go to you. But Terp, what do you make of this fall to the 3rd round? And then kind of what is your outlook on Devonte Adams this year?
The fall to the 3rd round is a little bit surprising to me. I mean, I'm not in on him this year. The quarterback uncertainty. I'm not the biggest Antonio Pierce guy, as some are. But I didn't expect him to fall this far. There's always somebody who loves it, the excitement that surrounds him with getting all the targets and all that good stuff. But I'm more worried about Minshew and O'Connell and then them just, run the ball a lot more, playing a little mouse football and not getting Adams the amount of targets, that he's gotten over the years. He's also getting up there in age. That's always a question. They added Brock Bowers as another target guy that could steal, some touches from him. I don't think he's going to fall to the third round in most drafts, but it's kind of like the Kyron Williams situation for me. Somebody else is going to love him more. He's not somebody I'm going to be targeting a ton. I'll mix in some, in best ball just to have some exposure. It won't be a 0% type of situation, but it's definitely not going to be a high-owned guy, especially with some of the guys that are going in his range that I just like better.
Nelson, what are your thoughts on Devonte Adams' fall to the mid-third in this draft?
Well, I think he's a year older, and I think he's now on the wrong side of 30. And usually, though, those players, as good as he's been, I'd rather just be a year early off of a guy than a year too late. And I'm not in love with the quarterback situation, the offense in general. So at his second round price, I'm probably not going to have much Adams, but they're in the third round. I think that's a fair price. Like, I think that's kind of like where he belongs. Like, that's where he should probably go. If you bake in the fact that, like, he's 31 years old, getting up there in age, the offense, he's to a degree, he's quarterback proof, but it's a new, I believe it's a new offensive coordinator there
New
also.
Getsy.
Yeah. That guy's not really impressed me when
Shocked he got a job after what he did in Chicago.
Yeah. So that's my feeling on him.
They're on the clock right now, but Team 1 had a bit of an interesting start. Obviously, they take CD at the 101. No surprise there. Obviously, most first overall picks this year have been Christian McCaffrey or CD Lamb. Then they kind of reach for their next two picks. Nico Collins has been going mid-third. They bump him up to the 212. And then Malik Neighbors has usually been going at that 3-4 turn. And they take him about a round earlier than ADP. And then they go on the clock. Amari Cooper, who I have it actually in my notes right here. I think he's been going right around this kind of range. And then Jalen
That's a fair spot for him.
Yeah, so the Amari Cooper pick, but I was really asking about Nico Collins and Malik Neighbors getting pushed up. So Nelson, what me and Terp love doing is, and I think people love signing up for it, is during the draft, not only do we discuss the players, we'll discuss the team builds, and we share our honest opinions. So what are your thoughts on kind of pushing up Nico Collins and Malik Neighbors there? And then obviously they were on the clock. They just go Amari Cooper, Jalen Hurts. So they're pissing yellow right now. What are your thoughts on Team 1 so far?
Yeah, so my theory with like these 350 leagues, there's so many of them. I truly believe I'm an aggressive drafter by nature, and I'll just take the guys that I think fit my team. But if you're going to do any type of volume, and I'm going to assume that Team 1 is a little bit of a volume drafter, only because we're here in June, and whoever's drafting in here, probably is going to have several of these teams. Otherwise, if you're only doing like a 2 or 3 teams, you're probably saving it to August. So yeah. I'm going to say that a guy like Neighbors, like I want to get a discount on him, and rather than pushing him up in a draft like this, because there's going to be other teams that are going to have, it's going to be the right draft that the way it falls to them. And they're going to have Neighbors with another player that is locked into the third round. And it's just going to be a better build overall.
Terp, what are your thoughts on Team 1?
I mean, I'm not really excited about it. I mean, I don't mind the Hurts pick. Obviously, I'm a homer. I'm never going to say a negative word about CeeDee Lamb. Nico Collins, do I like him? Yes, but it's just a crowded situation in Houston. Spending that kind of capital in a league like this, I mean, you need production from Nico Collins. Diggs is there, Dell's there, obviously Dalton Schultz. Joe Mixon is no slouch in the passing game. To spend this kind of capital on Collins is a little bit of a reach for me. I'm a Malik Neighbors fan, but what Nelson said is pretty much exactly, how I thought about it. Is he's going in the 4th round. Malik Neighbors can only go up. He's never going down in these drafts. So this is the time where if you want Malik Neighbors, you try to get him at the discount, because the discount's going to close with one preseason, pop play, his first preseason, game, or, Daniel Jones or whoever the quarterback's going to be there. chucking one deep to him and him making a big play. He's never going to get any cheaper than he is now. To get him, in around the 4th round, beginning of the 5th round is where I'd be targeting him right now. It's not that I don't love the player, but to take him at the 2-3 turn, you're just pretty much pushing up a guy that's probably going to end up there anyway, when other teams in this contest that have been drafted, and many of these guys, like Nelson said, are volume players, they're getting discounted Malik Neighbors with, guys like, Jalen Waddle and, Marvin Harrison and guys like that. And, putting you behind the 8 ball because, you're coming from behind and everything else has to be more perfect, especially when you get to the shootout round. Because if a guy like Malik Neighbors gets in there, you're not going to be as different as, some of the other guys that are going to be having them.
I feel as though a clear kind of tight end tier in this format and has developed. You have kind of your big 5. Usually Laporta and Kelsey are leading off, and then in some order of McBride, Kincaid, Andrews, all gone by really now that it's gone by the late 2nd. Then you have your Kyle Pitts and Evan Ingram, who I think there's on both sides. There's a lot of people who are in love with both situations. This draft, Kittle goes before him, but the guy I want to talk about was Jake Ferguson, who's been going consistently in that 5th round. Had a really good year last year as the Cowboys were that high-flying aerial attack. Is this a guy who's going to deliver on his ADP? Obviously, we're in the tight end premium format here in the Fantasy Pros Championship. But this is a guy who some of it is just name value comparatively to some of the names around him. It's just Jake Ferguson isn't always the sexiest pick, but again, off of a great year. Nelson, what are your thoughts on Jake Ferguson and his kind of 5th round ADP?
I'm neutral on him this year. He's a guy that probably I got to get some type of discount on him to draft him. He's not a guy that really I'm going to be looking for, but at the same time, I'm not fading Ferguson. So just neutral opinion on him.
Terp, any opinion on Jake Ferguson?
I like him. I like the Dallas offense. I think the Dallas offense is being undervalued in fantasy drafts right now. Brandon Cooks, Jalen Tolbert, Jake Ferguson. Jake Ferguson is going a little bit high for my taste, but if you are a little bit behind the 8 ball at the tight end position and he falls maybe to the 6th round in drafts, I probably bite. Some of the guys that are going around him, I just like better. The Mixons, the Pickens, the Kirks, the Jaden Reed type of guys, I would draft over Ferguson. But this offense, in my opinion, is one of the most undervalued offenses right now in fantasy football. Dak's not going anywhere. He is going to put up numbers. Mike McCarthy's going to throw the ball. You saw it last year. They added nobody in the draft, so that's good for guys like Brandon Cooks. Jalen Tolbert is one of my favorite clicks at the end of draft. I'm not saying he's a superstar or anything like that, but he came on a little bit at the end of the season, and the possibility is there where he's getting drafted to definitely, smash his ADP. So Ferguson, I'll have some. He's not going to be somebody that I'm like running through, getting crazy to draft, but he's definitely somebody that I'll have some exposure to.
People in the chat are raving here about Team 8. Just to real quick review, they went Amon-Ra St. Brown, Drake London, Pacheco, Kyle Pitts, Jake Ferguson, and just took Hollywood Brown. Terp, I'll start with you. Again, chat's loving it, or I'm assuming you are as well. What are your thoughts on Team 8's draft so far? And I quote from the chat, a stranglehold on this draft right now is what people
Very nice draft. Nothing negative to say about it. Like I said, Ferguson might be you switch that pick with Joe Mixon or Pickens or Kirk or Reed or any of those guys, I probably like a little bit better. I'm surprised Kyle Pitts fell as far as he did, especially in this format. I put out a tweet the other day that if you want Kyle Pitts, you better get him now because, especially in the FFPC format, he's going to move up in drafts. I don't see him being in the 4th round of any drafts when we come late August and early September. He's going to, if Kirk Cousins looks healthy and they're buzzing in the preseason, he's a guy that's going to move up, in my opinion, and get very close to that 2-3 turn. I could easily see him getting up there, because there's a lot of uncertainty at that, Neighbors, he won't go there, but Kyron Williams, Derrick Henry, ETN, Waddle, Cooper Kupp, you could easily plug Kyle Pitts in there. So, I really like what Team 8 did. Hollywood Brown is a guy that I'm targeting in a lot of drafts. He is, in my opinion, a better pick than a guy that a lot of people were hyped up on, Xavier Worthy. So very nice from Team 8. Nothing negative to say so far.
Nelson, I'll ask you this. Mile High Luke in the chat asked, why is Pitts universally outside the top 5 tight ends? If that offense is healthy, how is Pitts not at least a number 2 target there? And he has already smashed with a good quarterback. I will just say before you answer, Nelson, I mean, just looking at it saying universally top 5 when it's a pretty loaded top 5 tight ends. I mean, Laporta, Kelsey, McBride, Kincaid, Andrews, I think maybe even a better way to phrase it.
Let's not forget the most under talked about tight end in probably NFL history in Evan Ingram. After what he just did last year, and really they've got worse at, I like Brian Thomas and Gabe Davis is Gabe Davis, but, besides Christian Kirk, who's going to take targets away from Evan Ingram?
Yeah, no, Evan Ingram and Pitts have been drafted in that same range. I agree. But I think the better question is, and I think Terp alluded to it, which is that eventually Kyle Pitts is going to, you're thinking he's going to slowly start moving up and get kind of drafted maybe more consistently in the 3rd. But Nelson, do you kind of agree with that Kyle Pitts is, I mean, it's the 3rd or 4th year in a row now that the high stakes fantasy community is kind of obsessing and in love with Kyle Pitts and the idea of Kyle Pitts. Are you believing in it this year, that this might finally be the year we see a true Kyle Pitts breakout after his exceptional pretty rookie year and then kind of has faded off each of the last couple?
I actually disagree that people are fantasizing with Pitts this year, because I actually think that's a really good price for him. I compare him to like Dalton Kincaid. Like why is Kincaid going in the 2nd round and Pitts is going in the 4th? Like that would be like my comparison of like two guys that, they showed flashes, super talented guys. They're going to be a focal point of their offense. Kincaid obviously already had the upgrade in quarterback with Allen, but Pitts just got an upgrade at quarterback and an upgrade with the play caller. So like Pitts and Kincaid should be going in a similar range. And Evan Ingram doesn't make sense to me. Like Evan Ingram is essentially Sam Laporta, Trey McBride, and Kelsey. Like what? Look at the year he had. Nothing's changed this year for me to think that he's not going to see those similar targets. And like, why is he going in the 4th round when you have like a guy like McBride going that high up in the draft? So like those would be the guys that where I would probably be living in that range, and I'll end up with like a lot of Ingram and Pitts on teams because I'm not going to want to pay that 2nd round price on those other tight ends when I compare Ingram and Pitts to some of them.
I think that's why I know Terp's high and Ingram, a lot of people are, but I think this idea for Pitts, we're 2 years removed from Pitts was a 1st round pick in this format. And now he's kind of going in the 4th round in a way better situation than he was 2 years ago. I think that's what people are getting really excited about.
No more Arthur Smith.
Yes. The hatred for this is an anti-Arthur Smith show. So that is been known. We have 2 on our shit list, right? The main 2 on this it's Arthur Smith and Clyde Edwards-Helaire. And those are the 2.
He's not on mine. He's on yours.
We each
love when he gets drafted.
We each get 1. Wanted to kind of talk about Zamir White. And Terp, I know we had talked about it with Devonte. You're not a fan of Antonio Pierce maybe as much as some people. You're unknown about kind of this offense. What do you make, though, of Zamir White? At least from what I've seen, right? The discourse of Zamir White is all over the place. You have some people I've seen who are very high on him and the stretch at the end of the year that he had. You have some people saying, I don't understand why he's not getting drafted closer to Alexander Madison. Where are you at on Zamir White, and who do you think he's going to be? Nelson, and also Nelson, I can bring you into this. Does Zamir White at all fit into any of your kind of fade list parameters?
No, he's a 6th round pick.
Okay.
So I look at that a little bit differently. I think that's outside the range where a lot of these running backs going in that spot, there's not as much downside. Like if you miss on a pick like that, I don't think it's as detrimental to your team. I can tell you right now that I had a bunch of teams. There was 2 players that were going in like the 5th, 6th round early in the draft season, but mostly there were fixtures in the 5th round during the main events, and I was on both players. One was Rashad White. Okay, congratulations. Did very well in my leagues with Rashad White. The other one was Alexander Madison. Okay, and I looked at it as it was like a volume play, and I just felt like Madison was going to be the guy there in that offense, and he was going to get a ton of touches. My point is, those teams, yeah, it sucked. Him as my RB2 in the 5th round, it did not work out at all. It was a struggle all season for him, but he was easily replaceable, or not easily replaceable, but he was replaceable on a lot of my teams, and I still did well with my teams that had Madison on it. So when I went back, yeah, Rashad White, those teams excelled, but I had Madison teams where I just kind of chuckled. I'm like, how the F did this team end up, in the top 2 in the league with me drafting Madison? It's just 3rd round price, Kyron versus, Zamir White, 6th round. There's a difference. It's all about replacement cost.
So what are your thoughts on Zamir White?
Very high on Zamir White. I'm about to draft him with Theo in a best ball draft we have going on right this second. I think we're 2 picks away. Zamir White's about to be our 8th round draft pick. I think 8th round draft pick. I'm ready to do backflips that he's still on the board because I'm very high on him. There's really no downside to me. Alexander Madison doesn't worry me. An unknown rookie doesn't worry me. I think Antonio Pierce clearly liked him. They brought really no competition in. Luke Getsy, he's definitely he's not Arthur Smith, but he's close after what the debacle in Chicago was most of the season last year. I mean, so that worries me a little bit, but I feel like Zamir White is a guy who's going to get plenty of work. Can he hold up? He's had a little bit of a injury history in his career. I think he can. He's a guy that I'll be targeting a lot, especially if you start. Everything's based off structure. Am I going to start with Zamir White as my running back 1? That's a little more hairy, but if he's my running back 2, pretty much going off what Nelson said, he has enough upside. If they build him into the passing game a little bit more, I don't see much downside in the player. With some of these guys that are going in the range, I think Zamir White is one of the safest.
Nelson, in the chat, Permar99 said that Jonathan Brooks is going to be a league winner this year. And as we said, we like interacting with our chat. Basically, are you in agreement with him, or are you buying Jonathan Brooks? Again, 7th round, unknown kind of the injury. Will he be kind of put on the PUP list? How will he recover from the torn ACL? The most talented running back in college football last year who was draft eligible. Obviously, the injury dinged him. So what are your thoughts on Jonathan Brooks? And I think a lot of people I've seen, maybe I'm exaggerating, but you see people out there, at least in our chat rooms over the last couple, who are repeating this idea of, Jonathan Brooks, it might be a slow start, but down the stretch, he's going to be huge for fantasy owners. What are your thoughts on Jonathan Brooks?
I don't like that pick. So
I love it. Tell us why.
Yeah. Again, one of my rules is I really don't bother with players coming off ACL surgery. Mm-hmm. So Brooks fits that profile, and I just don't think he's going into a situation in Carolina where okay, he's a talented running back, but rookie, first year coming off the ACL. Chuba Hubbard was actually pretty solid.
Very solid.
Yeah, he was pretty solid last year. And Miles Sanders was trash, but, he's still there. I don't see how that's not a committee with Brooks, even late in the year. So 7th round, there's some running backs that haven't gone off the board that go after him that I'd much rather have. So he's just a guy that is probably not going to be on my radar.
In the chat, people were talking about, Tuvi here is asking, anyone have a firm stance on Jaden Reed versus Christian Watson? If that hamstring gets addressed, he ought to be the one, right? Terp, we know you have a stance. Nelson.
I like both players. I love Watson. I've always loved Watson. I will always draft Watson. He's a guy that if he figures out the hamstring, obviously last year was a disaster. He was a guy that I was very overexposed to, and it didn't work out because he was out most of the season. But if he can figure out the hamstring issues, he's, in my opinion, the best receiver on that team. He fits everything with Jordan Love. Love Jaden Reed too. I think they're leaps and bounds above everybody else. I know there's some Wicks talk and some Romeo Dobbs talk and, all that stuff, but love Watson, and he's very cheap. He's not getting that. I mean, last year he rose to a 3rd round ADP in drafts. Where he's getting drafted right now, he has the risk built in, and in my opinion, he's worth the risk.
Nelson, what are your thoughts on those 2 Packers receivers?
I see actually on Twitter on my timeline like a lot of Jaden Reed love, and I think if he goes any higher than what he is now, I'm gonna end up being off of him. And I like Watson's price, so he's a guy that he fits the type of player, wide receiver that I'm looking for in that range. Super explosive. So I'm more interested in Watson at the price than, pushing up Jaden Reed.
Mile High Luke with a question here for you, Nelson. He wants to know, where do you have Lad McConkey, who just went off the board at the 802? Where do you have his ceiling?
His ceiling? So I typically do like a range of outcomes for players. So when someone asks me that, like McConkey, he could be the wide receiver 1 on that offense that I'm predicting to be a run-heavy offense. So it's one of those things that like his ceiling is probably he doesn't have like this like huge ceiling, but I could see him, he could be like a fixture as like a wide receiver 3 in your lineup and work out that way. But I don't see like much more upside, but I think that's still solid. Like where his draft price is, I think is fair, like where he goes.
I had a question for you, personal one, which is you kind of mentioned how part of your idea is you're just not taking guys coming off ACLs. And from a personal opinion, I think my stance used to be similar, but it's changed. I think some of it's just medical advances. You're seeing players recover better from them. I think there's always kind of this slow starts to the year, but I mean, Breece Hall is the clear kind of, best of the best in terms of recovery, but you're seeing that. I kind of wanted to ask you, I know by no means are you a medical expert, kind of this tightrope surgery with the broken legs. You saw it with Tony Pollard. Tank Dell had the similar injury. Is that also similar for you, or just staying away from guys with that injury? Because that's another one where, and me and Terp last year, just full transparency, big Tony Pollard guys last year, burned us.
Disaster.
But even on our shows, we talked about, hey, look, guys who had this tightrope surgery, they struggle. And our idea is, well, just a situation. He's a talented player, medical advances, he'll be fine. And we kind of overlook some of that historical data. Is that kind of, for Tank Dell in particular, he's going in the 4th round, but beyond just the ACL, is that another injury that you kind of stay away from?
Yeah, for sure. I think there wasn't enough made of that surgery that Pollard had. And you saw like it sapped some of his explosiveness. He just didn't look like the same guy. Like if you remember, like for like 2 years, we're sitting there like, would you sit, Zeke's ass and let Pollard get more touches because he was so explosive? And then it's like, okay, finally Zeke's gone and he's going to get a chance to get this huge workload, and he did, but like he just, it was different. Like he wasn't super explosive, like cutting, like turning the corner, off tackle runs where he was so good. It just wasn't getting through the hole quickly and getting by defenders. So I think it's something that you should probably proceed with caution with Tank Dell. I think that's kind of pricey. And at the end of the day, like Houston, I think their offense could take us another step forward, but that's like a good example of like Nico, Diggs, and Dell. Like something's got to give, because I'm telling you right now, all 3 of those guys can't pay off that price. It's just not going to happen. Like Stroud has to have like a Brady Manning type year where he throws for 5,000 yards and 50 touchdowns in order for them to pay off. So those are, you got to figure out, if you're a player drafting, and you got to figure out which guy you like. But, I think you got to be careful with that. And then definitely Dell is a guy that fourth round is kind of pricey for a guy coming off that injury.
I'm going to make a comment about the draft real quick, and then it'll segue into one of your targets this year. I don't understand how any drafter – I tried to be a lot nicer this year, but I'm going to break my rule right here.
Yeah.
I don't understand how any drafter, after what we saw from TJ Hockenson's injury last year, can pull the trigger on TJ Hockenson in the 8th round over Pat Freiermuth. Pat Freiermuth is way too low in this format, but what do you expect from – like, TJ Hockenson's a guy that I don't care. I'll say it. I'll have 0% this year. There's just – I mean, that injury was really, really bad. And, yeah, I know, medicine has changed and all that stuff, but I don't expect TJ Hockenson, if he had Kirk Cousins, wouldn't be drafted. With Sam Darnold, with J.J. McCarthy, there's going to be a lot of growing pains in that offense. And you're getting a guy who literally had his whole leg reconstructed. So how do you take TJ Hockenson over Pat Freiermuth? Will be a mystery to me, and spend 8th round capital on him. It'll segue into one of the guys that I know, Nelson, we talked about that you're targeting this year, and that's Pat Freiermuth. I'm going to guess you would do the same thing and take Freiermuth over a guy who probably won't play most of the season.
Yeah, if I had to guess, that drafter having Kittle probably is looking at the name too closely. Hockenson, popular name. Here he is in the 8th round, and not really looking at the actual situation itself on what Hockenson's coming back from. And he probably felt that he had the luxury to draft Hockenson there in the 8th round with having Kittle already and not counting him as his starting tight end. So I want to give him the benefit of the doubt of like why he drafted Hockenson, but yeah, it's not a pick. He's not a guy that I'm looking to take anywhere close to the 8th round. And then with Freiermuth, he's up there with one of my favorite tight ends this year. So we've talked a little bit about the tight ends, and in this format, I always do a few of these leagues here at FFPC. And the big thing is always, tight ends definitely move up in this format. And just looking at it, I'm probably not going to have any of those 2nd round tight ends on my teams. And like I mentioned with Aiden, like Evan Ingram, Kyle Pitts are going to be the guys that I'm going to be targeting. And if I miss on them, I'm probably shooting myself on the foot, in the foot talking about this right now. But Freiermuth is going to be that guy that I'm going to push up in drafts. Like he's the next guy on my list if I miss on those other 2 guys.
Arthur Smith, the one thing, I mean, I said no, it's okay.
Always a worry.
And the chat mentioned it. We talked about it. Now, granted, what was the issue was a lot of those targets were going to Jonnu Smith or the 3rd string or 4th string tight ends. But, they did throw to the tight end. And Pat Freiermuth has shown himself to be a very capable receiver. And obviously, the Steelers' offense was a mess last year with Matt Canada. And Freiermuth, I believe I think he had a concussion, missed some time. He was a guy, though, who you were wondering why they weren't using him. Obviously, Deontay Johnson is gone. They did draft Roman Wilson, but Pat Freiermuth should have an elevated role. And I completely agree with you. Big quarterback run, Nelson, here in the 9th round. Kyler Murray, Jaden Daniels, Dak Prescott, Joe Burrow, Jordan Love all go kind of out. And then even I'll throw in Jared Goff here, who goes in the 1st pick of the 10th round. Out of those 6 names, who would you most be targeting?
Kyler, Dak, Love would be like the 3 guys that I would be interested in.
No Jaden Daniels.
I'm neutral on him this season. So
are you worried about the rookie, growing pains? Are you worried about the Kingsbury? Because it seems like, we always talk about names who are popular, who are going to get more popular. Daniels just seems like he's another guy, one pop in the preseason, is going to, in my opinion, jump above these guys. And not that it's warranted, but I mean, with his rushing upside, I think he, fits that mold of what people saw with Anthony Richardson last year.
Yeah. No, I get it. With Jaden Daniels, I don't even think like Kingsbury is necessarily like bad for him, because you could look at Kyler and see what Kyler was able to do in Kingsbury's offense. But Daniels, I don't know. Just a guy that I don't have really a good feel for. And based on where Kyler, Dak, and Love are going, I'm I'm probably gonna like those guys the same, if not a little bit more. So I'm gonna end up. It just comes down to like I kind of put players in groups, right? And when I'm drafting, if I feel like there's a handful of guys that I like, I'm not gonna go and take like Jaden Daniels, that rookie, quarterback, over those other guys. So it's more about that. Like I'm not off Jaden Daniels. I'm not saying that I wouldn't draft him. He's not on my fade list. It's just, there's plenty of quarterbacks that I like just as much is really what it comes down to.
I've said it before. I'll tell you the issue with Jaden Daniels is he treats himself on the football field as like he's a rag doll, and he's not a big guy. I mean, you hope they cut it out of his game, but at LSU, he's launching himself into multiple defenders at ridiculous times, and he's just bound to get hurt if he continues playing that way. That's my biggest issue with him. I don't know. People will say, and it's true, as anyone can get hurt. But I'm just saying the style of play that he had at LSU. If he continues playing like that in the NFL, I think his injury risk is incredibly high for his kind of, slighter build. So that's my thought on Jaden Daniels. Nelson, I was kind of wondering, obviously you mentioned Kyler, Dak, Love. You didn't mention Joe Burrow, and this is purely just I want to, pat myself on the back because I've been saying for months I'm completely off Joe Burrow because that wrist injury completely scares me. I just wanted to see real quick, is the Joe Burrow, him not listing, just kind of your neutral? You like the other guys more, or is there something there with that, recovery from the wrist injury that's, not a lot of quarterbacks, if any, have had?
No, it was on purpose. I excluded him because he's on my fade list. He's just not a quarterback that I'm going to be taking. I don't like the vibe from that team this year. And again, this is going to be a little bit unpopular. Picking Joe Burrow out of, all quarterbacks that I could pick to fade. But like the last 2 years, I've been able to pick quarterbacks that I felt were not gonna do well. And, one was Justin Herbert, and then the following year, and then before that was Deshaun Watson. So, it ended up working out. And those were kind of guys that were going kind of early. Watson was kind of getting a little bit of hype. Now he's trash, right? He might go undrafted.
He's a value now in some drafts.
Yeah, he might go undrafted in this league. Who knows? And then like Herbert, same thing. Like now, no one wants.
Great.
But Burrow, I'm not saying he's gonna fall into like the Herbert Deshaun Watson tier, but Aiden, you make a really good point. That's one of the factors is that wrist surgery. I just don't like it. I don't like it for the first year, him coming back. I don't like the fact that, his top two wide receivers want contracts. They want extensions. So they're not really happy. And no one's even talking about the fact that his offensive coordinator that he's known since he came out of college, Callahan, is gone, and it's now a new coordinator. And I don't care if it's like a guy that's in-house and, is stepping up. We've seen many times where those guys, don't do well and they struggle. And it's a new rapport. It's a new chemistry with a new guy. And Burrow's always known Callahan since his rookie year. So just don't like the vibe with that team.
A couple of questions in the chat and then people kind of discussing it, which is, it's a bit of a weird backfield. It's this Cleveland backfield. And, Jerome Ford, obviously Nick Chubb suffers a devastating leg injury, ends his season, still kind of unknown on where his status is at entering this year. Jerome Ford did good in relief. But a couple questions in the chat. I think most of the comments and response were Ford answers, but they were asking, Nelson, what are you doing with that Browns backfield? And if so, Ford or Chubb, or just kind of a full fade of either?
Yeah, it's funny that you're bringing up Chubb right now, because I'm looking at the draft, and like as we're talking, I'm also looking at how like teams are being built, and I was looking at that Jefferson team, and I was liking the team overall, and how it was being drafted, and he could not rattle off the 4 running backs that I
just
dislike.
The dustiest running backs. Oh my god!
I mean, if you asked me, name 4 running backs off the top of your head that you dislike, those would be like the 4 running backs that I'm just not going to have on any team of mine this year. So, but to answer your question with Chubb, again, coming off a serious injury.
5 in a row.
Zeke. I mean,
he might be the best out of the 5.
Zeke might be the best of the 5, which is crazy. But I mean, talk about, 2020 is calling. My
Jesus.
Lord.
Last year, he'd be setting the world on fire. Najee, Eckler, Chubb.
My
Holy
God.
cow.
Like, where's the upside? Like, if you're doing this build, and I agree, they had a pretty good start, in my opinion, through Stroud. And then if you're gonna go 0 RB, like, let's get some upside picks in here. Like, man,
so many other guys.
I need to see some like explosive guys in that backfield. It's just, if you're gonna build this type of team, and I actually like building these kind of teams. You need explosive. You need juice, man. And those guys are not it.
Jalen Warren, Chase Brown, Pollard, Spears. I mean, Blake Corum.
Give me Kendre Miller.
Love Kendre Miller.
Even Jerome Ford. I mean, Marshawn Lloyd, Jalen Wright, guys like that you could write a path to get there. I mean, what's the path that any of those 5 guys? I mean, I don't know.
Harris is,
Harris is okay.
I don't want to be critical of the guy. I don't want to. Again, I don't want to hurt anyone's feelings, but you guys brought me on the show to,
that's my job,
to talk and be honest, about the teams. And I want to be able to, at the end of the day, help people. And I would say, like, okay, Najee, that's fine. Like, he should be okay. Good running back to hang your hat on. But after that, like, Javonte, like, after that injury, like, he looked washed to me last year. Eckler's washed. Chubb coming off that serious knee injury, he's not going to be the same. And then, like, Zeke, like, if he had built it with like some like guys with juice, like Spears and Warren and guys like that, and like we were talking about, and Kendre Miller, like, Zeke's not a bad guy to say, like, okay, he's like a safe, solid pick, right? He's going to get goal line touches. Back in Dallas now. He should get some passing down work. Like, he's not going to be a world beater, but he can be solid. So that's the only thing is, like, when you build that team and you have like a really good, nice tight end, you've got the nice quarterback, you've got 4 wide receivers that can like be really good week in, week out. And then you just draft like boring running backs. Like,
so boring. Like, not even one that you could be like, all right, nothing. Jeez. And when Zeke's your exciting one, that's when you know you got some issues.
Yeah, like, I was loving like Team 4. I love the start that he had. I actually think that, like, he got somewhat of a discount on Marvin Harrison, a discount on Travis Etienne, and a discount on Devonte. Like, he kind of like rattled off those guys. And then Bijan to me is like RB1. Like, he can break fantasy this year. And I've said this, on the show with Theo, and I think I've said it in my Discord chat on FTN when asked, like, he's the guy that could have like that McCaffrey type season where everyone's just looking and it's like, damn, like, the guy in my league with Bijan has such an edge because he's just putting up monster games. So, like, I loved everything about that team. And then I didn't like, it was a head scratcher. Like the Brooks pick, again, we talked about it. Like people are saying like, oh, second half of the season, he could be good. Like, I don't know. Like I liked like he could have taken Godwin or Ridley as his wide receiver 5.
Yeah.
I think would have been better because he's got 2 really like workhorse running backs already. And then he comes back around. Like, what's Trey Benson? Like, what? Like, that's just like a throwaway pick when Freiermuth made way more sense for the way he was building this team. And you're getting him essentially at a discount, and he could be like a top 6 tight end this season. So, like, I would have loved this team where he would have as his wide receiver 5 one of those guys, Ridley or Godwin, came back with Freiermuth, and then, Brian Thomas, or at that point, then he goes and gets his like 3rd running back, right? There's guys on the board that he could have taken. Could have taken someone boring like Gus Edwards. You could have taken Jerome Ford, a Chase Brown. Those are guys that interest me there in that area. So
do you think that's a mistake that drafters make with like guys like Jonathan Brooks and Trey Benson? Like you look at like a Tank Bigsby like last year, the guys that start off exceptionally well through 6 rounds, they are too worried about, okay, at the end of the season, Jonathan Brooks and Trey Benson could be great. And instead, they're passing up glaring things that are right in front of their face. And that, by the time either they get there or the guy doesn't pan out, it's a wasted 7th and 8th round pick when they could have had a player like Freiermuth or a quarterback like Kyler Murray, type of situation, instead of Conklin and Caleb Williams.
I think it's an example of that drafter just kind of drafting players and not really looking at the construction of their team.
Yep.
And that's super important. Like I look at it as like, you are like this draft room already gave you gifts in the first 4 rounds, right? That's how I look at it. Like, all right, don't fuck it up, because
you can say the first 6 rounds. I mean, they're all very good
super soft. Like,
nothing negative to say about any of them.
Yeah, absolutely. McLaren, like he's a wide receiver 1 in that offense. So like, I like everything about that team. So like right when it started, like the first 4 rounds, I was keeping my eye on it because I liked that team so much. But I get worked up because like I'm disappointed because like I would have liked to see like Tyler Conklin, like I don't know, like I just look at it as like,
pick. I mean, it's not really a redraft. I guess overweight, he's not the worst.
Like Freiermuth, I feel in that offense is essentially the wide receiver 2 in that offense and going to be the number 2 option. He might even be the number 1 option.
It's possible.
And I'm not trying to like, this is not like trying to create this like hype or anything like that, but he could like it's a possibility. So Conklin is not that guy. Like Conklin's like on your bench. You're never feeling good about putting him in your starting lineup. He's waiver wire fodder. Like he's just so like I feel like when you draft a team like that, and these guys basically like you let them off the hook. They're giving you the draft. Like just put the puzzle together is how I look at it. So
we'll stay on team 4 because I have a quick question about team 4 real quick. Obviously, you waited on quarterback. Are you a guy? I'm pretty sure you're not, but are you a guy that double taps quarterbacks that like 11th, 12th round, like with a guy like Caleb Williams and Trevor Lawrence? Most years it was usually until recently, obviously the last couple of years, injuries, the quarterback position has made things a little dicey. But are you a guy that in a format like this, when you start off, no matter the players, pretty much up until Conklin, would you ever do that of Caleb Williams, Trevor Lawrence, double tap, or
so Turk,
later?
Yeah, so you and I have known each other for years, and obviously, like if you're following, like we've been in drafts together, you're following my drafts, you kind of have a pretty good feel of like how I draft. I will say this: you're right up until this year. I've never been a double tap quarterback kind of guy. Last year I was, and
it had to work out for you because with all the injuries that happened, I mean, most guys, Justin Fields, I mean, you go down the list of quarterbacks that, missed time or missed the season. I mean, you could have been in, Justin Herbert, guys like that if you didn't have a backup, you were starting Tommy DeVito.
Yeah. So last year, like my strategy was this. I was all in on Josh Allen, Jalen Hurts. Wanted to have them on every team. And I was okay. End of the second round, I felt was kind of iffy with the running backs and wide receivers that were in that range, ADP wise. And I wasn't going to go and draft anyone, crazy that, goes mid to late third round in the second round, unless once I got to like my high stakes type of leagues, then I didn't care about ADP. But it was guys that I never really felt comfortable with. So Allen and Hurts were like just easy picks. I liked a couple of other quarterbacks. Like I liked Lamar. I liked Trevor Lawrence a lot last year. That didn't work out. But if I didn't end up with one of those like top quarterbacks and I pushed it back, my next two guys or the ones that I had I was most fond of was Daniel Jones, terrible, and Dak Prescott.
Worked out very well.
I would double tap those two guys often on teams. And it kind of goes to show you that you might get the first guy wrong and then you end up with a Dak where, he kind of saves your season and you're not, scrambling at the quarterback position. So I to answer your question, I don't mind that when you wait on quarterback as long as they waited. I like going with like two quarterbacks like that.
I just wanted to kind of, we discussed a lot there, and there's just some things I wanted to follow up on, just news and notes almost. Is you kind of mentioned Bijan RB1 potential, like could be a Christian McCaffrey. And those literally are the words that the Falcons coaching staff, Zach Robinson's on the podium saying, we want to use him like Christian McCaffrey. And you would expect it to be a competent coaching staff coming from kind of the McVay tree. I don't see a reason why they won't. That's why I know I'm super high on Bijan. You mentioned kind of back to Team 6 and some of their build. Javonte Williams, I mean, still kind of going 8th, 9th round. Broncos beat reporters are saying, he might be a legitimate cut candidate. So some of these ADPs, sometimes it's interesting how quickly ADPs rise or drop with news, and then some of them stabilize. And some of that is, high stakes fantasy players have a good read on things. But Javonte is one who, wasn't inspiring last year, although I know it's a year removed from the ACL, and usually that's when back to 100%. But Sean Payton doesn't love him. Another kind of news and note I wanted to touch on was, and I'm blanking on the reporter, but it was one of the Chargers beat reporters was kind of asked.
J.K. Dobbins hype, huh?
Yeah, he was asked it was like a fantasy owner was like, hey, what running back for fantasy?
It was Daniel Jeremiah, but I don't know I could be totally off by that name, but I'll look it up.
No, I don't think. Maybe because Daniel Jeremiah is a draft guy. I don't know. Someone had said, I believe it was a Chargers beat reporter. Long story short, was asked like, "Hey, what's the Chargers running back right now to own in fantasy?" And they responded, "Draft J.K. Dobbins."
I am correct. It's Daniel Jeremiah.
So, is he a Chargers beat reporter?
I guess so.
Regardless, Nelson, what are your thoughts on that Chargers? We've talked a bit here in the last 10 minutes about some less than desirable backfield situations. I'm going to ask you maybe about another one. Gus Edwards, J.K. Dobbins, Kamani Vidal. What are you kind of making on the Chargers backfield? And first of all, before we even answer, the fact that we're talking about J.K. Dobbins, the fact that he's going in the 12th round off of that Achilles, I thought his career was close to maybe being done last year. So props to him for even working his way back into this territory. But what are your thoughts on the Chargers backfield, and specifically maybe a little bit of J.K. Dobbins' steam is creeping up over the last week?
Yeah, I'm not really fond of any of those guys in that backfield, but they're going to be relevant is the issue. So, and it's not like they're going super early. So 12th round, taking Dobbins to find out if like maybe he could be the guy at some point during the season is not a bad pick, right? So I could dislike a guy, not like him very much, but feel like it's still a solid pick. I'll give you an example. Like Gus Edwards and Dobbins, what they remind me of is Brian Robinson. And he was a guy last year that no one really wanted him, right? In drafts, he was just a guy, just, okay, it's 10th round, take Brian Robinson, but you weren't excited about it. You were excited about Antonio Gibson, right? He was the guy with the juice. But sometimes like those boring guys find a way, for things to work out. And the coaches tend to like sometimes those boring guys. And that's what that backfield looks like right now. You got Dobbins coming off injuries, and he's not looked the same, and he's struggled really to stay healthy. And then Gus Edwards is kind of like that boring guy in Baltimore, but now he goes, to the Chargers, and like he's probably going to be somewhat solid, and there's nothing wrong with like punting like your RB2. And that's what I was saying with you guys, is that take some guys with juice, but then if you end up with like a Gus Edwards, Zeke, J.K. Dobbins, like some boring guys, but like they're probably going to give you weeks where you're going to have them on your bench and it's like, oh shit, it's Gus Edwards week, or it's J.K. Dobbins week in week 5. And now you're feeling confident starting them. So like, I don't think there's anything wrong with it. Sometimes it's all about price with like certain players.
I mean, the great Steve Smith, former Panthers Ravens, he would always say some guys are Jags. They're just a guy. But in fantasy, sometimes that gets it done. There was a question a while back in the chat, and me and Turp try and answer as many as we can and get to them all, but I don't want to skip it. Continuing our trend of maybe, kind of less than sexy backfields. No really excitement, no juice, as you guys have been saying. But that Giants backfield, I forget who had asked it. It was way up, but they said kind of what it is you both kind of making of that Giants backfield. They said they think that there might be value there. Nelson, I'll start with you, and Turp, I want to hear your thoughts, because we haven't really touched on the Giants very much besides Malik Neighbors in these drafts and in our live draft coverage. So Nelson, what are your kind of thoughts? Is it similar maybe to what you were saying about Gus Edwards, J.K. Dobbins, Vidal, where one of them is going to be relevant? So what are your thoughts on the kind of the Giants?
My bet is going to be on Gray, the Gray kid.
Yeah, Eric Gray.
Coming out of there and possibly being the guy. So in drafts, I'll take him late in drafts. I'll take him in like with the last pick in best ball, something like that. Singletary, not a fan of his. Where he goes, there's definitely running backs that went after him that I prefer over him. So I'm just never going to end up drafting him.
So what are your thoughts on kind of that Giants backfield? I mean, as you said,
Tyrone Tracy's going to be the one that everybody's excited about. He's the one that got, some of the, pub before, training camp begins. I like the player. I don't love the player. It's definitely a backfield to watch because, Devin Singletary is not a sexy name. He's probably going too high in drafts. He's not a guy that, you might get a couple of weeks out of him, but like in a redraft type of situation, like you're probably going to be wrong most of the time. Gray is getting a lot of the hype early on. It's definitely a backfield that if you're going to take some shots, it would be on Tracy or Gray right now. You're getting them for free. It could be a Kyron Williams situation where, he'll start moving up as we get closer to August and September with the uncertainty last year with Cam Akers. Nobody's going to be running to the table to hit the Devin Singletary button. Let's just call it what it is. He's an okay NFL player, but he's not somebody that's going to be a league winner for you. Is he going to have weeks? Yes, but this is a perfect situation to take some shots on these guys, whether you're a Gray guy or a Tracy guy, or maybe if they add somebody, one of those Bears guys, Roschon Johnson, a player like that, possibly, if it happens, but this backfield is definitely one to watch. It's something I feel like you need a little bit more information on, but it's never going to be Singletary. So, if you're drafting Singletary over guys like, Chase Brown or, guys like that, please enter my leagues, because it's just not something that's going to ever be me. And I'm just not going to do that style of drafting with Singletary. He just bores me. Again, okay player, will get work, but he's never going to be someone I'm running to the table to fight for.
Nelson, obviously this is the Fantasy Pros Championship, weekly managed tight end premium. A couple of people have been asking in the chat what the format was, $350 entry. But Nelson, I wanted to ask you, you had kind of talked about how you were saying you're out on maybe that big five of tight ends and you're looking in the Pitts, Evan Ingram range. But there's been a lot of people on our shows, on Twitter, who have really been commenting they like some of the tight end depth even beyond that. I mean, you're seeing a lot of, I believe, Nelson, you are a Patriots fan, correct? There is Hunter Henry love out there. I'm a big Jonnu Smith fan. I know there has been some great arguments for Isaiah Likely at his. With kind of Mark Inger's injury history, if he goes down. Just a very kind of general, broad question you're kind of looking at, from these double-digit rounds. Is there any tight ends that kind of catch your eye in this that you like as maybe some value picks?
So I think Henry's just fine, and there's you can always find a tight end late that is going to be somewhat relevant during the season. Even someone that emerges and becomes more than relevant. But, like Henry, Noah Fant is interesting. There's a tight end that in this type of format, he hasn't been drafted yet, so I don't want to name names. So I'll wait to see if he does get drafted. I think he's got a possibility for some upside. But I actually look at it as like, I don't want to end up with one of these guys as my tight end one.
Okay.
So I'm going to make a concerted effort to draft, to be in that. I want to be in that game of, those tight ends that are going before round 10. I think once you get past that, I don't mind tight end 2 as like depth for some of these guys, like Musgrave. I like, but there's a lot of guys that are just going to end up not being very viable.
So obviously, as you said, you are a Patriots fan. At a personal level, I'm a believer in the Patriots to outperform their expectations. Like I'm taking their over right now, but some of that is more relative to, I think, their defenses get healthier and and the offense can't be much worse than it was last year. Mm-hmm. I don't know how that correlates to fantasy, but the chat, like all the guys to be talking about, chat tonight has been hyping up Demario Douglas. Is that all the Patriots offense going to have any kind of fantasy relevancy beyond maybe some, weeks here and there? Is there going to be any consistent performer that we can draw from? Is it Ramondre got the big contract? Or is there maybe a later guy who people are kind of discounting who could have just a volume role on this team?
Yeah. So I think I mentioned it with Theo when we did the podcast with him, that Demario Douglas to me, is definitely a target of mine this year. And I think he's going to end up being the wide receiver 1. And I think he's going to end up being very good. I think Stevenson's another guy that right now is underpriced in drafts. And I believe that offense is just going to be better than last year. It can't get worse.
It can't get any worse.
They're a bottom 3 offense, right?
Drake May is definitely an upgrade.
Yeah.
Jacoby Brissett is an upgrade.
Brissett is an upgrade. Mac Jones was broken. At the end of the day, Belichick bringing in Matt Patricia and Joe Judge, a defensive coordinator by trade and a special teams guy to run the offense was just foolish. And that ended up breaking Mac Jones, because Mac Jones actually looked like he could be legit his rookie year, but he was with Josh McDaniels. And most people hate the guy, and he's a terrible head coach. He's had a bad history with it. But as far as a play caller and offensive coordinator, he's very good. I think McDaniels is good, and Jones was good with McDaniels. And ever since then, after his rookie year, Jones, even with O'Brien last year, O'Brien coming back from college, it just didn't mesh. It didn't work. The offense, the talent was void. The offense was void of talent with those guys last year. But like Douglas flashed to me, and I think that this year the team's going to be better. I think Van Pelt, good offensive coordinator, solid. I think, Brissett's a professional quarterback, can move the ball. And then eventually May is, I think he's going to end up being the starter eventually. And then he was my favorite quarterback in this year's draft. So I was pretty happy to get him, because I actually think, like, my prediction is that he's going to be better than Caleb and Jaden Daniels as an NFL quarterback. So
that's not a popular one. That's definitely a bold take, because most people are, this year at least, Jaden Daniels over Caleb Williams, or neck and neck, and Drake May is a distant, especially in drafts. You're seeing it a distant third.
Yeah, I mean he's going to the least favorable situation. The Patriots were a trash offense, and Caleb Williams was surrounded with Keenan Allen, and
you can't ask for a better Roma Duze, DJ Moore.
I mean, you could ask for a better situation. You could ask not Shane Waldron as your offensive coordinator.
That's very true.
But no, I mean, I gotta agree. I had not even going to consider myself, a sharp drafting scout, but just from film I watch, other people's breakdowns I've watch a lot of college football. Drake May was my QB2 even over Jaden Daniels. I think the thing with Drake May, which was pretty consensus by, most draft experts, was he has highest ceiling as anyone. He just does have the most work to do. He has to do a lot of refinements, and you pair that with maybe the situation he got dropped into is, I think, what's scaring people. But I mean, just from the Patriots, they got more talented on offense. The defense was all banged up. I think that for me, I know I said it, but the over 4.5 to me, I'm just very confident in.
It's insulting. It's pretty insulting for a Patriots team.
Yeah, it's just defense alone is going to win them 3 or 4 games.
So much unknown in that division.
Their defense is sneaky good. The Christian Gonzalez pick last year was a home run.
He was great before he got hurt. Judon was hurt.
That kid's legit. Like Belichick, when they faced Miami, Belichick put him on Tyreek. Like he was shadowing Tyreek. Mm-hmm. So that kid's going to end up being legit. So. Yeah.
And that was one of Tyreek's worst game. That was week 2, I believe. Tyreek had come off the bonkers week 1, and it was just, I think he had 42 and a touchdown. He had the touchdown, which helped him a bit, but he had 42 yards. So yeah, that's interesting. I mean, just while we're on the Patriots, and I think you obviously know them, they're your team. We like Demario Douglas. I think that's kind of trending a bit, slowly starting to kind of develop. Is at all Javon Baker, I know, has gotten some love. Jalen Polk, do you think anything is there, or are you a little more wary of those two? I mean, again, they're going so late. It's dart throws. What are you going to do at worst? You just drop them to waivers. But if you're projecting, do they have a fantasy impact, or would you lean no?
Yeah, so before the draft even happened, I had done my sort of scouting and watching games, and I do this every year where I take a break, after the fantasy football season, and just relax and decompress. And then I get into the rookies. And when I'm watching film, obviously, I like Marvin Harrison. I like Neighbors. It's a huge wide receiver class this year. But the one guy, and I always try to find a guy that is not a popular player. And the one guy that stuck out to me that I'm like, this guy is going to be he's a baller. And it was Javon Baker. So that's the guy that I could see, probably not to start the year necessarily, but I could see later in the season where he's making plays and he's fantasy relevant.
This is something you definitely need to pay attention to, because your guy a couple of years ago was St. Brown.
Yeah, so a couple of years ago, Amon-Ra St. Brown was just not really a household popular name, coming out of the draft. And I, had mentioned that I believe on, shows or whatever it was, where, most people still remember that, where Amon-Ra St. Brown was the guy that was like, this guy's going to emerge, eventually this year and be somebody. So, yeah, I think Baker, he fits that mold. Like he's just a playmaker. When I watched him, I think that's going to translate well to the NFL. And like I said, between Demario Douglas, Drake May, might not start off the year, but eventually he's going to be the starting quarterback. Stevenson, I think if the offensive line holds up and they don't have, many injuries, I think the offense, could surprise people like second half of the year.
Terp, fun fact for you, Javon Baker was a Kentucky commit for like 3 days when he transferred from Alabama.
You and your Kentucky stuff.
And he left.
Jesus God. Every show, it's something.
Just had to bring it up. Javon Baker at one time was a Cat briefly. Speaking of Kentucky Wildcats, Wan'Dale Robinson, I think, and I mean this generally, gets like the most praise from star receivers, like on podcasts and stuff, for a guy who has really not done anything crazy of note in the NFL. CeeDee Lamb, I believe it was on Micah Parsons' pod. He was like, they was asking like, what are those like the most underrated receiver, and he said Wan'Dale and was raving about kind of his shiftiness. And we're in the final 5 rounds here, so I always kind of just dart throw who I want to talk about in this last, because it's you're taking your lottery tickets. I like all of them, but I've been preaching how Wan'Dale Robinson I think is supremely talented. Obviously tore his ACL his rookie year, came back. Giants offense was just a shit show last year. I just wanted to ask, Terp, you and me have talked about him probably 2 years now, but Nelson, and you, I'm assuming you're just going to say you don't even have to appease me in my Kentucky fandom. He's trying to get Wan'Dale, but this is a guy who I'm just waiting, whether that be a situation that emerges down the road, that's just a better quarterback play, a better offense, or maybe that's this year, because I do think he's talented. Now he's Malik Neighbors kind of playing alongside him, that I like him again. If I'm taking my late round dart throws, that's a guy who I'm trying to get as much as possible. And I wanted to just see if you had any agreement on Wan'Dale Robinson there.
Yeah, he fits that mold of like some of these wide receivers. If you're trying to do so here's the thing, my style of drafting, by this point in the draft, I'm done with wide receivers. So that's the only issue, is that on my teams, I'm going to have to grab them off like the waiver wire, because I'm already going to be pretty stacked at wide receiver, where I'm not going to be in consideration for a Wan'Dale Robinson.
Mm-hmm.
But like him, Gabe Davis, Javon Baker, Rashad Bateman, Michael Wilson, and there's a couple of guys that I'm looking for them. I don't see them, so they haven't been drafted, so I'm not going to name them. But like, there's some other guys that, they're dart throws, and I would definitely consider them. They fit better like in a best ball format
For sure.
than like this type of league. Like, I don't want. So for a team construction standpoint, when I'm drafting these redraft leagues, I don't want my bench to be cluttered with like Wan'Dale Robinsons of the world, and I'm not trying to be disrespectful, because Wan'Dale Robinson could work out like during the season, but it's more of like I'm looking to take like running back stabs at that point, and like handcuff running backs and guys that could just be like total difference makers if an injury happens. So I usually like to stockpile my bench with running backs and have like a core of like 6 really good wide receivers. And I'm kind of interchanging maybe my wide receiver 3 or my wide receiver 4 with 2 of the guys that are on my bench, if that makes sense.
I think we've had, numerous experts, numerous analysts on the show, and that's been a consistent thing that has kind of been noted, that I think our viewers and should really take note of, that the most successful players, best ball, which I think people know is obviously very different, but in redraft, I think this has come up multiple times where it's, you're drafting your running backs late, you're trying to handcuff, you're looking for some stability there. And best ball is more of where you want to kind of take your dart throws on receivers. Nelson, I want to ask you, had mentioned couple of rounds ago when we were trying to kind of, discuss some late value tight ends. Was the one that you were kind of intrigued by, was he drafted yet or no? Because I wanted to get back to that.
Yes.
If he was.
Yeah.
Please, I would love to hear who he was.
Jelani Woods.
Okay. Please. We've heard some Jelani Woods love on this show before.
I was on that bandwagon last year and crashed.
Me too, but you know what, Turk?
I mean, he was cheap. He wasn't like he wasn't a big asset, but at best ball, he was a zero.
Listen, last year was 2023, and this year is 2024.
Love the mentality.
Just gotta let it go. And I'm a fan of his. I like the talent. I like the player, and I think that it could work out for him this year in the offense. And at the end of the day, it's a 17th round pick. Like it. That's what I'm saying is like I'm looking for guys like him rather than taking, I don't know, like I don't want to name like someone be like disrespectful, but like I don't know, Kobe Parkinson,
Zach Ertz.
Zach Ertz is a good one. Like I'm not interested in like those kind of guys. Like I'm looking for the not even the rookie, like the second or third year player that hasn't broken out yet. That's the whole point of why they're going this late, right? No one's really interested in them. I'd rather take someone like that and just see how it works out. You go a couple of weeks into the season, if he's not getting snaps, he's not getting targets or whatever, you cut him and you move on to the next guy.
I'm going to ask a question that I think I've asked pretty much every show in the final two rounds. Turp knows what it is, but it's one of the more fascinating questions. And it's probably very well could amount to nothing and make all these questions foolish. But when we have guests on, I want to ask because each one has brought a different take. Nelson, the kickoff is changing in the NFL for this year. I can't even really begin to describe it. It's the XFL kind of format. Has that at all impacted you basically, I don't know, first off, your philosophy, maybe you have cared about defenses more in the past than others. I know some people are just saying, I look for kind of early weeks and then go from there. Have you been thinking about defense special teams more this year going into it with the new kickoff rule? I know most people have. And then if so, how are you kind of attacking it? What are you looking for?
Yeah, so I have since, I don't know, 3-4 years ago, I've made it a priority. Part of it too is because I'm a high volume drafter. Mm-hmm. I'm usually somewhere around 100 plus teams, redraft teams every year. So that's a lot of waiver wire work. And, if you're streaming defenses, it's like, holy shit, your Wednesday night is like,
torture.
Never mind Wednesday night, your Tuesday into all day Wednesday is shot, right? Mm-hmm. So what I found is, and I tracked it one year, a few years ago, was the money that I was spending in Fab for streaming defenses. At the end of the year, it added up to basically like a what I call like it was like $400 worth of Fab in total, because like the defense for that week that has like the premium matchup was going for like $37 or whatever. And then like, you're like, man, I want to get this defense. So you go like 45, 50. And before you know it, it's kind of a little bit out of control. So what I found was I was just wasting a ton of Fab when I could be using that $300-400 on like just taking a shot on a guy, like a guy emerges or whatever, and he's the hot pickup of the week and he's going for 300 plus. I now have the money to spend on that player. So I've actually made a concerted effort to draft premium defenses the last few years. I will say, Terp, I was disappointed because I was all in on the Eagles last year.
That was a disaster.
Yeah.
You're preaching to the choir on that
massive
one.
Disaster.
Talk about people who are disappointed in the Eagles defense.
Yeah.
Oh, these guys are going to pay off.
Yeah, I had them on so many teams last year.
Disaster.
Run it back this year, though. Fangio.
Yeah, yeah. So I'll be back on the bandwagon with them. I always draft my Patriots defense. And there's been a couple of years actually where it's actually worked out really well, where they've been like top 2 or 3 in fantasy defenses.
I mean,
so,
like what, 2 or 3 years ago, they like led the league in defense, special teams, like touchdowns. It was absurd.
Yeah.
Like they were single-handedly just winning. I know in some of my leagues, like teams weeks, it was absurd. Yes. So yeah, Patriots always a good bet.
For sure. So to answer your question, I do pay attention. I have paid attention to the whole with the kickoff rules and where guys are lining up now at the 40 and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And I've even heard Belichick on, I think he was on I'm not sure if he was on the McAfee show, what show it was, but I remember listening to him and he was talking about the strategy behind it and that you're going to see bigger guys in kickoff coverage.
Yeah.
And that question's been posed to me, on the FTN Discord with like subscribers asking me. And I want to say, like, I don't want to overthink it too much because I almost wonder if, like, Miami Dolphins was like the example. And are you going to see Tyreek? Like Mike McDaniel was talking about, like,
I don't see it.
Yeah. So, like,
They're going to see A-Chain out there? I don't see it.
Yeah. So, like, they asked the question, like, are you going to see like a Tyreek, returning kicks? And I just look at it as like, at the end of the day, the
Put
special
Jalen right
teams
back
coach,
there. Let's go.
and they're just gonna kick it into the end zone at that point and not risk
any sort of weird injury.
That's what Chad has said, and why I kind of prefaced it by saying, this question might amount to nothing because there's a high likelihood teams could just concede. We'll give you the ball. What is that? The 30, I think, or the 35. We'll just kick it in the end zone rather than risk it. And it's probably the analytics game say to do that. But I think there's going to be there's some trial and error. So who knows what's going to happen there? So it's an interesting twist. That for a lot of people, obviously, Nelson, you're different, and I can understand it as a high volume, but there's also make a good case for paying attention. But I think there's still a large swath of the fantasy community that kind of is just, I'll stream it. I'm not going to worry about it during my draft too much. I'll look up who has some good early matchups, but this year just adds another little element to it. I have one more question from the chat. Dom Gazzetti asked, I want to get to it again before we go. And this is last question. It was basically, I think the question, Dom, if I'm getting it right, was, just in general, Nelson, we'll kind of leave it with a broad question, was about kind of what is your outlook on Tennessee? Really interesting team. You have Pollard and Spears. DeAndre Hopkins is still there. They signed Calvin Ridley to a big deal. And Will Levis, some people, looking at him right there in the middle of the screen, Dave Turp loves Will Levis. So what are your kind of thoughts? And you can keep them quick because I know we want to get going. We don't want to keep you too long. But what are your kind of thoughts on Tennessee and their offense?
So just like Drake made this year, Will Levis was my favorite quarterback last year in that draft. So I don't think the jury's still out on that. I think you need to have some patience to see how things work out with these quarterbacks. So last year, I think a lot of people were shocked, including myself, that Levis fell as far as he did. I think he's super talented. And then he got an opportunity, once Tannehill got hurt or whatever, and you could see the talent, but at the end of the day, the offense was void of talent, right? It was old school, run the ball, play defense. So I didn't think Levis really got a fair deal in the whole thing there. And I think this year, having Hopkins and Calvin Ridley and another year to here's the thing, like, he got an upgrade in coaching. So he went from Vrabel to Callahan, and Callahan's, offensive coordinator, basically going to be calling plays. So you've got now an offensive mind there. So I think, like, I'm high on the Tennessee offense. Like, I like all those guys. Hopkins and Ridley, where they go in drafts, like, it's a solid price for those guys. Nothing wrong with it. Pollard and Spears, same thing. Like, I don't want to say, like, can Pollard come back from last year? Yeah, he's now going to be, over a year removed from his surgery, gain some of that explosion back. Those are two guys that I would like drafting, because if one gets hurt, the other one is probably like a top 12 back. If one of those guys gets hurt, I think that's how talented they are. They upgraded the offensive line. I believe it was J.C. Latham. They drafted in the first round. So like, yeah, and then I'm a fan of Levis, so I think that they could be really good this year.
Nelson, we really appreciate having you on, ladies and gentlemen. That was Nelson Sousa, FTN Fantasy High Stakes Lead Analyst, one of the best high stakes players in the industry. Go get his fade list. It's out now. People swear by it, as they should. Terp, that's going to do it for you and me. We'll be back next Tuesday, 8:30 p.m. We're going to list the dates and the times and the drafts for people who want to sign out probably tomorrow morning. Also next week, Terp, you and me, main event live draft coverage on Friday night. That's going to be a big deal.
First one, right?
Yep, first one. We want to thank the chat as always. Nelson, I know I already said it, but again, thank you for having on. That was a great show. You gave a lot of great
advice. Go buy
advice.
the fade list. It's worth every dollar that you can spend.
As we should. Appreciate it. Again, to everyone, we will see you guys next